speaker will take you on a journey following the journey of the indicator of what is of paramount interest to us, especially during the past 6 months of the pandemic. Speaking on the Indian economy is Mr. Neelkant Mishra. Mr. Mishra is a managing director, the India strategist, and co-head of Asia Pacific Strategy for Credit Suisse. He has been rated amongst the best analysts in India by the Institutional Investor and Asia Money polls. He is part of the Advisory Council to the 15th Finance Commission and has been an advisor to committees appointed by the Government of India, such as R&R Committee on GST and the FRBM Review Committee. He writes frequently in prominent newspapers and magazines on economic issues. Prior to joining Credit Suisse, he was a senior technical architect with Infosys Technologies. He has also worked with Hindustan Lever Limited and has been an entrepreneur. Neelkant is a gold medalist from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, graduating in computer science and engineering, and was ranked 4th in the prestigious entrance exam to the IITs. He's currently based in Mumbai. To discuss the future trajectory of the Indian economy towards $5 trillion, please welcome Mr. Neelkant Mishra.
Thank you for that warm welcome and pleasure to be here.
Hi, Neelkant.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Very good. I think you can start.
So I'll make a quick 10-minute sort of conversation or speech on what I think is happening in the economy and therefore the implications for the market, and perhaps then we can jump into Q&A. The current state of the economy, I must say, is not good. We are seeing a stagnation happening much earlier than we had anticipated. So of course, early April and till about middle of May, the government itself was trying to restrict activity levels. That was the objective with the objective of controlling the virus. Since the time that those restrictions have been eased, the concurrent indicators are improving quite dramatically. We have seen an economy running from a pace of maybe 45-50% to jump up to about an 85% kind of level. Of course, in some it has moved to 98-100%. In some it is still at 65-70%. But at an aggregate level, we are at about 85-90% levels. The assumption that most had made that this trajectory of improvement would persist and that we would jump up to 100% very quickly. But unfortunately, that has not been happening. In the last 2 weeks, we have seen the most of the concurrent indicators starting to stagnate. What is also happening is that the rural versus urban split. So there has been this anecdotal evidence from various companies that the revival in rural areas has been significantly better than the revival in urban areas, and that's for very good reasons. The first being that the disease itself had not reached the rural areas with that kind of intensity, and therefore the fear of the disease. So unless people are aware of the deaths that have happened, are aware of people close to them getting infected, the resumption in activity levels in rural areas was much faster, because if there's no disease, people are much more free to move around. The second was that a lot of the government intervention in terms of cash flows has actually gone to rural India. But as we speak, there is evidence coming through that the disease is now starting to spread into remote parts. Just to give you examples that we have come across in the last 3-4 days. So not only Pune, which is very close to where we are, but also even remote parts like say a Bhagalpur or a Madhubani in Bihar, to Patna, Howrah, and so there are areas where the disease burden is spreading very dramatically, and therefore new lockdowns are emerging. And what this means is that the activity levels and the fear among the people is actually likely to increase, and therefore the stagnation may persist, and that would be quite scary. That if you remember, there was a point at which we used to worry about 7% growth becoming 5% growth, but here we are struggling at about 10% below where, or maybe 15% below where we used to be. So the current, of course, prognosis is not very good, but at the same time, we have to, when we are investing, we have to think over not just the next 6 to 9 months, because this is information which is well priced in, but we have to think about all the medium-term trends. So in 12 to 18 months, it is reasonably safe to assume that something will happen to the virus. Either it tapers off, like in most pandemics, or somewhere in the world there is a development of a vaccine. And the fact that second and third waves are hitting countries even like Hong Kong and the US means that the pressure and the commercial pressure and the regulatory pressure to get some solution out is going to be there. So if we are thinking about the medium term, I think we have to look beyond the pressures of the virus right now. We are going to be dealing with a very different type of world, but all the other positive trends that we used to be excited about for India, that the availability of infrastructure, the availability of services to remote parts of India are improving. So I've been a big proponent of the fact that the electrification of rural India, the availability of roads, the integration of market services, and now that is being supplemented by the cheap availability of data, financial services, and the government is now pushing through very hard in terms of even the reform of agriculture, because that's where 20 crore of our workforce was. And so as this starts to happen, we're also seeing among the few positive signs that is coming out of the pandemic, as the data points come through, we are seeing that very strong evidence of digitization. So UPI transaction growth is already at 90 to 100% year on year, which is the pace at which it was growing in February. We have seen UPI now in terms of absolute volumes outstripping IMPS, which is on the layer on which it was built. We are seeing a significant increase in formalization. So in many of the segments like food processing, where or even segments that relied a lot on wholesale markets, and therefore a lot of informality was prevalent, what we are seeing is a gain in share for some of the largest manufacturers. So, so this is something that I think is going to persist. There will be, as we come out of this crisis, a lot of the hard problems which we had been living with but had not tried to solve. There was no resolve, no collective thought about them, like the limitation of financial capacity. That's something that we need to address very urgently. And it is now becoming very clear that India's current architecture in the financial system may not really work. So as you know, any crisis exposes the weak, it weeds out the weak, and that's a process that I think is undergoing right now. We will see, and we should see intervention by the government on healthcare. This is something which has very strong links to economic growth, but for some reason we had been ignoring it. But now that it's reasonably clear that the pandemic is going to be with us for quite a while, and that there could be future pandemics that could be hitting in the next several years, and how costly it is to actually have a healthcare system that is not working, we would be addressing that. We would also be addressing, some of the deeper concerns, like what we saw, the absence of affordable housing. One of the reasons that the virus spread so rapidly in urban India, it was the prevalence of slums and chawls, which was because of the poor quality of affordable housing. And those are again priorities that I think will sort of jump up the ladder for the government. And those, so as we think of the economy 2 to 3 years down the line, it is likely to be a very different one, and much better prepared for the future. What is also happening, and this is partly aided by the government's measures, but some of it is also kind of a push away from China. So even as global supply chains are resetting at a pace that we haven't seen for several decades, we are seeing the government come up with some very radical recommendations on electronics manufacturing, on the shift of the value chain of organic chemicals, and we are finding that several billions of dollars are on their way in terms of FDI, and a lot of this is a result of the push driven by demographics in China, where the industrial workforce has already shrunk by 30 million, 3 crore in the last 5 years, 6 years. And therefore, labor-intensive manufacturing is starting to shift away from China. There are several opportunities that we are not availing ourselves of, like in leather and footwear, in apparel. But there are several where I think there is evidence of good activity on the ground. So I think as we think about the next beyond the next 12, 18 months, there are all the earlier structural changes are things that we should keep in mind. Coming to the markets, we have seen what seems to be a disconnect between rather concerning outlook for the economy and the euphoria, or rather the very sharp rebound that we are seeing in the market. This is something which is to be expected. My sense is this may actually continue. What happens at times like these is that the government is the only entity standing. So the private sector is licking its wounds. The private consumer is also quite wary. There's a rise in precautionary savings. So at this time, it's only the government that can spend, but the government taxes are low, and therefore the government deficits, as it starts to spend, will have to be funded to some extent by the central banks. And this is starting to happen very explicitly, even in developed markets, and particularly in developed markets, and to some extent even in emerging markets. What is also happening, and this is quite remarkable, is that within a space of 3 months, we have gone from having a massive dollar scarcity globally to a problem of dollar surplus. So in the last 12 months, ending March 2020, the RBI had to sort of intervene for up to 3% of GDP. So the increase in currency reserves was up to 3% of GDP. This is a pace which has continued in the June quarter, and my sense is it will continue to be in that pace. What this means is that the injection of money supply, because you can't let your rupee appreciate because capital flows are picking up, and at the same time there is a need to at least help out in creating demand for Government of India bonds. So as that happens, the injection of money into the economy will be at a far greater pace than at which the economy is growing. And this excess money supply, so we call it M3, so this excess money supply is something that generally causes asset inflation first. So there is a whole body of work and a whole set of people who are worried that this will cause a lot of CPI inflation, and that's how it works. But my sense is that comes with a lot of lag, and there will be opportunities for central banks globally to at least adjust to that should inflation signs start to appear. But at least initially, I think the risk is that you will see a lot of asset inflation. So that's already starting to become visible in the stock markets. We've also seen even state government bonds, the yields have fallen a lot. So as the crowd invests its surplus funds, it becomes, there are pockets where this starts to happen. This is very early stage to call it a bubble. And it is quite possible that if it is a bubble, that it may inflate a lot before it bursts or it deflates. Because at this stage, it is in the interest of central banks globally to have inflated asset markets, because the last thing you want is companies going bankrupt or losing their invested capital. So the objective of the government, of the central banks, would be to create a situation where the firms can recapitalize themselves through raising equity, or just keep themselves liquid and prevent bankruptcies through making available cheap debt. So, for example, in the US, high yield issuances are at a record high. So therefore, the inflation in equities serves its purpose, because once an enterprise is destroyed, rebuilding it takes several years. So, but in 3-6 months, if this persists, and the Nasdaq is as an all-time high, and these things persist, at some point, I think the inflation will start leaking into other parts of the economy, and therefore central banks need to be very wary of that. So that's my market outlook. I think we are far more tied to global markets than to our Indian economy. That's something I've said over the last several years, and I continue to say that. And I am very worried about the pace and the trajectory of the economy over the next 12-18 months. But I think that the structural drivers supporting India's 5-year outlook remain intact. So on that point, I'll stop, and I guess there will be question answer after that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mishra, for the wonderful insights. We will now have a Q&A session with our fund managers, Akash Singhania and Rakesh Tarve. So, Mr. Mishra, they have a few questions for you. Over to you, Akash and Rakesh.
Hi, Nilkant.
Hi.
Thanks for the brief talk and your outlook on the markets as well as the economy. First question is, despite COVID has happened over the last 6 months across the globe. Before that also, India was not doing that great in terms of corporate earnings or growth. So it has put a spanner on that, especially it has put a further spanner on that outlook. So what was not working even before COVID? That's one. Another thing is, you're talking about 12-18 months will not be that great. Then after this dust settles, shall we be in a better place, or is the structure going to change overall in terms of our growth? So these are the two parts of the question. What was not working before COVID anyways, and COVID has put a spanner, and COVID also has put an opportunity in front of us. So suppose somebody takes how are things going to change? Will it change for better structurally for us? That is the second part.
Thanks, Rakesh. So I addressed the second part in my prepared remarks. I guess you were preparing for the session. So the first part, what was not working, I think the crux of the problem was the financial system and the fact that our monetary conditions were too tight. So we have see the right now, and this is I think something that has persisted through the crisis as well. If you have a 150 trillion rupee, 150 lakh crore financial system, so the credit to the private sector is about 150 trillion rupees, of which about 104 trillion is credit from banks. The rest is either mutual funds or NBFCs. Now, even within the banks, about 60%, as you know, is PSU banks. And while the small private banks are a small part of the aggregate loans, because they were growing at 35-40%, they were a much bigger part of incremental loans. So what happened after September 2018 was that the NBFCs kind of went into a tailspin. They went into survival mode, so they stopped growing. They were very large. They were 30-40% of incremental credit for 3 years, and then suddenly they just disappeared. Then you had, because a lot of the bond market existed only to fund the NBFCs. The bond market went into a tailspin because people were wary of who held which bonds, etc. And that's crowd behavior. The PSU banks, I think, being pushed into mergers which should not have been, they should not have been pushed into, also made them even more averse to issuing new loans than they already were. And then some of the steps taken earlier this year on also led to the small banks, small private banks, starting to become more risk averse. And then, of course, the bond market got another shocker a couple of months back. So as of now, it is an economy which is effectively where there are only 5 banks that want to grow, right? 4 large private banks and 1 large PSU bank. You cannot grow an economy with, where 30%, 35% of your capacity is at most 40% of the capacity is working. So this is something that was a problem. This is only worsened in the last 2-3 months. I think the second issue was also that on the fiscal side, and actually, sorry, I'll come to fiscal later, but on the monetary side, for till the time that this crisis broke and the mutual and the nominal GDP growth actually went low, we were falling into a what I call a downward growth spiral. So as our inflation went down, our nominal GDP growth was slowing down. That was slowing down tax collection for the government. And it was putting more pressure on the debt to GDP ratio. But we were not allowing, and this perhaps the clogging of the financial system was a problem, but I think monetary pressure could have been created to offset that. So the interest rates were not coming down fast enough. So if you have a slowing economy, the effective interest rates need to come down because if your top line growth is now slowing from 13-14% to 8-9%, but your effective cost of interest is still the same. So I think and then one of the reasons was that M3 growth was continuing to lag nominal GDP growth. So some of the fiscal contraction was, I think, fully justified, but the fact that we were kind of shrinking ourselves into nothingness. So as you constrain your fiscal space and your growth slows, and that constrains your fiscal space even more, and the interest rates are not coming down, the government was still funding itself by 7%. It creates a very sharp downward spiral. So the hope is that this crisis exposes some of those. So we have seen the RBI maintain that 11-12% M3 growth, despite the fact that nominal GDP growth has fallen very sharply again. We have seen some resolve from the government, and maybe as a result of what has happened globally, that the government, I think, though we haven't seen that translate into a lot of action yet, but I think conviction is building up that we need to take stronger fiscal steps to revive growth. And the weakness of the financial system has been laid bare, that there are very few firms right now. And I think in some ways it's also a learning curve, that initially the assumption is that if it's a PSU bank, you instruct them to lend, they will lend. But I think this whole concept of pushing credit it needs to be replaced with the concept of credit allocation, that if there is a certain amount of credit which is available, which is the best sector to give it to, and is the plumbing. So right now that credit needs to go to the smaller firms, that needs to go to firms that need to really survive. But the plumbing there, the NBFCs and some of the small private banks are not working. So I think that those weaknesses are being exposed, and hopefully they will be addressed. One of the things, just to reiterate, because you asked about what happens beyond 12 to 18 months. So there are several things that I think are the structural trends are still working, right? So the digitization is still working. There is a very aggressive push to formalization. The larger firms with existing supply chains are gaining share. There is, I think, because of this I would say an opportunity to do reform. We've already seen some long pending measures in agriculture. There is quite a bit happening on global manufacturing. In fact, there are teams within the government which are now reaching out to the global largest manufacturers and starting to get them to shift their manufacturing to India. We've seen some very constructive schemes, like, India is already manufacturing 20% of global handsets. So of 100 handsets manufactured in the world, 20 are already being manufactured in India. We are already a net exporter of handsets. If the news announced scheme works, our market share in the next 5 years will go up to 30%. Mostly we are making low-end handsets. This will become higher-end handsets because ASPs of $300 plus. So, so a lot of these things are happening, and I think that once the fear of the virus goes away, behaviors normalize very quickly. As of now, it seems that they won't. But if you see the evidence of what happened in countries where, at least for a few weeks, the virus fear was gone, people quickly go back to restaurants. People start taking staycations, meaning hotels are empty. So you start doing that. So I think there will be challenges, but I think there are lots of structural changes. It's as they say, right, in our tradition, that it's only when everything is burned to the ground that new and a more efficient ecosystem emerges. So this is perhaps the burning of it has been accelerated. So what gets created on top of this will be far better and much neater.
What I wanted to ask about one more thing, in the longer term, it's not about in the past, say till 2020, we had been a services-led country. A large part of GDP is now services. So when there is a talk of going towards $5 trillion in whatever it happens in 5 years, 6 years, nobody knows. But whatever is the path of that $5 trillion, will it have the same contours? That's what I wanted to ask. Will it have the same contours of services, agriculture, manufacturing, or will it change for something else? Because that will open up opportunities for business in other sectors which are not prevalent at this point in time in India. So suppose somebody takes 5 years out, COVID will go definitely in 1 year, that's humankind will survive. So 5 years out, India will have a different kind of GDP structure as compared to what we have today, and that will open up new businesses. That's what I wanted to actually ask you about future more specifically.
Okay, so no, I think that is bound to happen. I wouldn't measure it as a sudden, 10% shift in GDP over 5 years from services to manufacturing. That I don't think will happen, and that may not even be necessary for it to happen. But I do think that there will be a much greater impetus on manufacturing. There already is, and there will be policies that help us increase our manufacturing share. So many types of consumption where we have been greatly import dependent, or where despite a very large sort of population in the working age, where we can sort of assemble and manufacture things for the world, we have been lacking. I think we will see some very good progress on that. So this will create very different types of challenges, and one hopes that the government is and then the regulators are prepared for that. For example, this balance of payment surplus that we are seeing is something that may persist. We will have to make use of all possible opportunities to make sure that the rupee does not strengthen. And as the rupee, this has to be done in a manner which also saves us from the criticism that we are becoming currency manipulators, like what China was blamed to about 15 years back. So I'm quite sure that I think the 5 years later, we will be a much bigger part of global manufacturing chains than we are right now. I think that services will also grow in parallel. In fact, and there are significant opportunities for us to grow on the services side as well, right? So now if, medical care, and there are so many now apps available even for India, where remote consulting can happen. I mean, it is quite possible that the doctors that we have been sending abroad can actually earn a decent living sitting here. So if all the graduates from AIIMS migrated to the US or UK, if there is an arbitrage available and for basic consultations, and so a a lot of these openings and opportunities, I think, will emerge for us because this acceleration in the digitization process globally, I think, will throw open. So I do not want to portray it as a change and shift of GDP. I would rather say that there is an opportunity in manufacturing and there's an opportunity in services as well. Agriculture is something that I think will require continued handholding. The reforms have been, I think, quite structural and quite dramatic. But there is a problem of excess in calorie supply globally. So as population growth is slowing, and as you know, and even in this crisis, there are countries where there has been, India with a PDS is actually much better off than many other countries. So like Nepal, Bangladesh, a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa, there are people who are now back to rationing portions or rationing meals. Like, instead of 3, you have 2. And if you're having 3 meals, then you eat a lot less than you used to. And therefore, and over and above that, the transition to more expensive calories in terms of fats or proteins or more micronutrients through vegetables and fruits, which are more expensive per calorie, that transition is going to slow. So something that was already pretty bad, that we had, an excess of edible calories, is something that's going to worsen. It's something we've been flagging to in India for the last 4 or 5 years. Now we are flagging that this is actually a global problem. And therefore, these opportunities that India has, and the fact that India is like 12% of global cropland, is something we require agriculture to become a lot more dynamic. And those changes will mean that the shape of it will be very different from, should be very different from what we are seeing right now, which is mostly, non-perishable crops, cereals, pulses. That's where a lot of acreage is allocated. I would rather see India competing with the Netherlands. With a small piece of land, they are doing so much of floriculture, exotic fruits and vegetables, or the New Zealand doing a lot of dairy, or Australia doing a lot of dairy. With its year-long sunlight and a lot of water and very fertile soil, I would expect us to do much better on those than we have done so. So there will be, I think, lots of changes, but not necessarily the mix of manufacturing with the services.
One more thing, per capita income in India, although we have become one of the largest economies in terms of size, absolute size, but our per capita income rank will still be more than 100 at least. So even Bangladesh is now ahead of us. So whenever we go to a larger size, do you see a probability of higher per capita income rank, which actually puts more money with a lot of basically larger population, which actually again is good for businesses in a country like India where you have such a large population? If more money is there with people, it opens a lot of vistas. So do you think that say 4 or 5 years down the line, we shall have a better per capita income? That is a question on productivity also. That's a question on what kind of growth we deliver. So do you see that thing changing meaningfully over next, say, a decade also in India?
Okay, so to break this question down, so I think when you see if GDP grows, and I do think that if we are seeing 5 years out, then I think we may be losing 1.5 to 2 years. So FY22, I think even now companies are gearing themselves to assume that FY22 will be more or less the same as FY20, and then we start growing from that base. So we may have lost 2 years because of this crisis, but if you're thinking beyond that, and I think a 9-10% nominal GDP growth is something that we should assume we will revert to. It will require some changes at the government, a lot of policy drivers. In fact, the government's role in the economy in the next 2 years, at least, will be very different from what it was in the last 3 decades. Because, as I said before, the government is going to be a lot more sort of have the potential, because in companies, there will be a reluctance to invest because of the uncertainty. In the last 30 years, as I like to say, I mean, anyone who was saving, whether it was a company or an individual, was doing so only because they read it in some Jatak Katha or some grandfather told them that, look, beta, there is some problem that can emerge. Otherwise, it was in everyone's interest to spend as much as possible, and companies would invest whatever was the surplus available to them. But now you will see a lot of precautionary savings. So the government role is going to be much bigger. As the government role becomes much bigger, and the growth is led by the government, because it is because see that the distribution of income. So the first question you have is, will income inequality go up? The income inequality at this level increases. So when there's a crisis, it is the manual and labor-intensive jobs that go down first. So the income inequality actually worsens in the next 2 years. I would expect that the higher end holds up, whereas the lower end struggles. But as the government intervention happens, and because the government is in a democracy, it counts every individual as the same, their policies will be much more geared. And you can see that even in the first 6 months or 3-4 months of government action, that they are focused on more the Garib Kalyan Yojana, making sure PM Kisan payments are front loaded, that NREGA numbers are much higher than they were. So that will be so I think they will try to counteract that. So long as the government role is bigger than it was, on 5 years later, will income inequality be worse? I don't think so. Particularly if we are successful in transforming agriculture the way we want it to. And I'm talking 5 years. This won't happen in 1 or 2 years. In 5 years' time, if agriculture is transformed, if we are able to become part of global manufacturing chains, I don't expect income inequality to worsen. The second part of the question that you have is the split between capital and labor, right? So in a normal GDP, say if 100 rupees of GDP is created every year, about 68%, and see this varies from year to year, I'm just giving you a broad average over the last 4 or 5 years. So 68% goes to individuals, about 17% goes to the government, which is 16 to 17%, which is tax to GDP. And the rest is retained earnings of companies, right? So if the companies issue dividend, that goes back to the individual. The company pays interest, it goes back to the individual because deposits come from individuals eventually. So will this ratio change is I think another question. Will capital become much more important than labor, and will companies savings, like what's happening in Japan, for example, is that companies' precautionary savings have gone up a lot, and individual savings are not happening. But in a way, companies are doing, in Japan, people don't get fired. Even despite all the stress that is happening, even restaurant workers are not getting fired. So I think so that mix is again a lot more to do with policy. The fact that the government has corporate tax rates, and the fact that eventually most activities are triggered or originate in enterprises. As a policy, we may want companies to save more, meaning to have more retained earnings, which they can then reinvest. So while that is that capital versus labor split is a lot more policy dependent than the first one, my sense is that it may be better for policy to initially push for more to stay with enterprises, because then they can reinvest and create jobs, which then helps everyone.
Yeah. Hi, Neelkant. So coming to the market part, so we discussed the economy and macro, and as you mentioned brilliantly, the outlook on the economy and macro. So if I come to the markets, and all our audience wants to know that, so you correctly mentioned in your introductory speech that there is a disconnect between the macro and the markets, and we are looking more at the cues from the West. So the question over here arises is, India has underperformed the West in terms of the US markets. So whether we would go in line with the West with some underperformance, or there's a catch-up rally. And secondly, following the cues of the West, so when does decoupling resurface for India, which we had seen in the past decade?
Right. So the first thing is that this disconnect is visible across economies. In fact, even in China, where the market is up 26% CYTD, in dollar terms, it is effectively being seen as a as a government-backed rally. So the government has signaled that it's in everyone's interest to get into the stock market. So people are reminded of 2015, the last time this happened. In the US, if the central bank, if the Federal Reserve threatens to buy baseball cards if needed, I'm exaggerating a bit, but the point is that they've been buying all types of assets. Of course, the risk assets tend to go up. So what we are seeing already, since the 1st of June, we have seen the Indian all market cap index catch up about 4.5%. So it was badly underperforming. In dollar terms, till 2 days back, we were about down, underperforming by about 9%. So we are down 12% CYTD. The world market cap is down about 3%. But 5% of that is a rupee. And as I was explaining, we have a massive balance of payment surplus. And the reason why the rupee is weak is because we're making use of this opportunity to make sure that on a relative basis, some of the currency market excesses are being reversed. So on an inflation real effective exchange rate basis, the rupee had been very strong. They're trying to make it a bit weaker. If you adjust for that, that 5%, so we are 3 to 4% is the underperformance. So we've not done at an aggregate level that badly. I think that we will continue to follow global trends. One of the reasons why we may have done slightly worse than others is that the share of banks in our index is much larger. See, right now what has happened the world over, the biggest uncertainty is with the banks. Because if you think about it, if there is a drop in earnings, it goes to, of course, the companies have a share of that. So if GDP drops by, say, 100, the companies would see maybe if their normal share of GDP is 15%, as I was saying earlier, in a loss year, it could be 20%. And then some of that will then flow through to the banks. And given that at this stage, there's a lot of uncertainty, every country has given moratoriums or given a lot of leeway for banks. So the quality of the book is unknown. There is a lot of opacity, and therefore the multiples have come down. And the longer this 85-90% economy persists, the bigger the risks that many of those loans need to be written down. So given that, so the banks globally have seen a much sharper correction than normal than the rest of the market. And because India, the financial system was a very large part, we have seen. So once you adjust for all of that, we haven't done particularly badly. It's open for investments from everyone, and therefore I expect that the global and domestic markets, stock markets, will be operating more or less in sync. In fact, we had observed that till end of April. Since then, the correlation dropped a bit, but it's still very high. If you just looked at the direction of closure of S&P 500 the previous day, it more or less decided the direction of closure of the Nifty today. Over time, the market became wiser. So, meaning got more tuned to it. So people started looking at S&P futures. If S&P futures today are showing a positive trend, Nifty does the same. So I think that strong correlation is likely to persist because this is a liquidity-driven rally, and I would expect India to at least continue down that path. I don't expect a lot of sort of volatility versus the global markets.
Sure. So the next question is, we have seen a trend of formalization in the economy, as you mentioned, and we have seen that larger players have gained market share at the expense of smaller or unorganized players. So in this context of the winners taking it all, when do we see a recovery in mid-caps in terms of their earnings and also their market performance? So how does the medium-term, long-term outlook look for the mid and smaller companies?
So, in the last 3 months, mid and small caps have done actually better than Nifty. In fact, most of the CYTD underperformance, when I say CYTD is calendar year to date, so the underperformance this year, they have caught up. At least the mid caps are now pretty much down as much as the Nifty for the year. Small caps are down a bit more. But it's very clear that there is a lot of catch-up rally happening there. For both mid and small caps, the dependence on the domestic economy is much higher than the dependence on global economy. See, for the Nifty and even the BSE 100, more than half the revenues are anchored to what's happening globally. Now, if the Chinese metal demand weakens, then a large part of the Nifty running revenues will get hurt. But beyond that, in the small and mid caps, that won't be the case. So, so as the domestic economy outlook itself is quite weak, my sense is that earnings recovery for mid and small caps would be quite a bit dragged out. In terms of price to earnings multiples for the mid caps, and we can only do trailing here because the forward earnings, because they're not well covered, there's not too much of forward earnings to buy. So on trailing earnings, the discount of the NSE mid cap to the Nifty has already gone from -13 to -5. This is lower than still lower than it was at the beginning of the year, and therefore there can be some more catch up. But a lot of what we are seeing in small and mid caps is a more perhaps adverse part of what, or a more negative aspect of what I was talking about earlier, that if you create excess money supply, it drives up the prices of financial assets, and it also drives speculation. This is a natural part in the market, that because markets eventually are being one step ahead of the rest, right? And so as this rally progresses, my sense is small and mid caps temporarily, I think, may continue towards that momentum until there is another big shock. But given all the uncertainties, if I was thinking 12 months out, I would prefer the safety of the large caps where there is liquidity, if I can, get in, get out rather quickly, as well as the fact that their earnings may be a lot more stable. Because we have to remember that this crisis is far from over, right? So while we have to always stay conscious that the DCF that implies underlying DCF that underlies stock prices is a very long-term one, and so we shouldn't get over depressed by what's happening in the next 6 months. But the next 6 to 12 months are going to be, maybe even 18 months are going to be quite a bit more chaotic than currently maybe priced in. So I would still prefer safety, though in the near term, say in the next 3-4 months, it is possible that small mid caps may continue doing well in terms of stock performance.
Sure. Another trend which we have been seeing is that the FI ownership in the Indian markets have been steadily declining in the last 5 to 6 years. And so, so just to understand that, how does India stack up among the global emerging markets in terms of fundamentals and valuations, and also whether this trend of declining FI ownership, when does it reverse?
So FII ownership. Hello. Yeah. So FII ownership has come down, but it's not come down that much. So it has been in the 20-21% range for quite a while. It has come down from, I think, 21.2%, 21.7% to about, I think, slightly about 20 or maybe slightly lower than that. But it's not a very dramatic decline. What has been a much bigger trend has been, and at least this was till the March quarter, because the last 3 months have seen a very dramatic difference now. So till the March quarter, what we were seeing was that domestic mutual funds, because they've been seeing steady inflows, domestic mutual funds were gaining. So their share of the holdings of the stock market has actually gone up. And we also have private promoters, and that has been mostly because of performance. A few firms, as you can imagine, have done much better than the market, and where the promoter share of the market is much bigger, of their company is much bigger. So there has been a share shift from retail and government to mutual funds and private promoters, and FIIs have been more or less the same. even the marginal declines that we have seen is more a reflection of the fact that, if that much of mutual fund money comes in, and India's premium at one point had started touching 30%. So when I look at India's price to earnings, this is forward price to earnings to world price to earnings, that premium in the last, since the global financial crisis, has been in the range of about -3-4% to +30-35%. And it has started trending towards that. And at that point, I think the global interest levels in India had come down, and growth was, as we discussed with Rakesh, that growth levels had started to come off, the growth premium had come off, and investors were less excited. At the bottom in this market, that the premium had actually turned into a discount, because, as I said, India had done very badly. Since early June, the 4.5% outperformance has also meant that our premium to world is now at about 9%, 8 to 9%. And so this is still at the lower end of that range. I think that this momentum perhaps may persist, and at least in the near term, we should expect that India may continue to outperform a bit. But broadly, I expect that 0 to 25% kind of range to persist. So if we go to the higher end of the range, we underperform. If we go to the lower end of the range, we outperform. So that's a more tactical measure. Structurally, I don't see something changing. If anything, I think the availability of money globally, maybe excess money globally, may be far more than the availability of excess money in the economy.
You very aptly mentioned that liquidity-driven rally is causing a global correlation in terms of market performance. And I would assume a decoupling is more bottoms or more fundamental for a particular economy. So from an Indian economic perspective or market perspective, what are the top 2 or 3 risks which worries you, which comes to the top of your mind?
So I think the first is the financial system itself. Because see, right now, we are, as I said, being driven by a third of our financial system. But the problem with such a scenario is that if 2/3 of the financial system is not growing or is in some way licking its wounds and trying to survive, it kind of drags down the other 1/3 as well. Because, economy slows down, bad loans show up everywhere. And the assumptions you may have made, even though some of the larger banks are actually very good, I mean, proven to be very good, maybe an exaggeration, but they are good asset, in terms of risk management. But even those assumptions can get challenged if there's a sustained weak growth. And if that was to happen, then I think there are, existential risks that emerge in India as to, and secondly, if say, the spread of the virus goes to a point. See, as of now, truth be told, the infection fatality rate of the virus is well below 1%. There are estimates that, and this I'm talking about global estimates. There are some people at 1%, but most of these antibody tests suggest that the infection fatality rate is about 0.4, 0.5%. All-cause deaths in India are at about 0.7%, right? So 7 out of 1,000 is India's death rate. So even if everyone was to get infected, and the 0.4, 0.5%, so this disease also affects mostly the already weak and the aged, and therefore on a pure economic impact perspective, as of now, it doesn't look like, and that's what is priced in. It doesn't look like it can cause a lot of damage to the workforce, or it can cause supply side pressures on us. I'm hopeful that the summer will kill it off, but it didn't, right? And so as we see the virus, the spread through rural India, if we find that the spread of the virus worsens or its infection fatality rate becomes worse, I think then there could be significant challenges that will emerge on the medium-term growth outlook for India. But as of now, I don't think that is a risk I would worry about too much.
Just one last key question, since we are running out of time. So if we see India for the next 5-10 years, so whether you would bet on the Indian domestic story, which includes sunrise sectors like insurance, telecom, or whether you think India will prosper with a global outsourcing and export destination, given the fact that China might lose on that count. So what would you advise, which sectors and themes between the two, which will do well in the medium to long term?
No, I think, see, things like insurance, yeah, I mean, all the structural angles that, we have under penetration. In fact, one of the few things that seems to be working through this crisis is that people have been buying more insurance. The total insurance number may have been weaker because of motor insurance coming down, but on life and health, all these, one-time risks, because as they say about even the Second World War, that the reconstruction after the Second World War made sure that infrastructure and the physical reality was more or less revived, but the scars that people carried in their brains did not go away for a generation. And therefore, it is quite possible that we see a focus on things like insurance for even once things are normalizing. So I think those are those sectors will remain our priority, but at the same time, I think the beneficiaries of as India becomes part of the global supply chain. Now, one issue that we have to keep in mind is that 40% plus of Chinese exports are from foreign firms, meaning they're not Chinese firms. So they're just using China as an export base, right? And as we see investments in India, even in electronics, we are realizing that, like one company is 25% of Vietnam's total exports. So a lot of that, at least front-end investment, is likely to happen from companies that are not listed in India or are not owned by Indians. So the advantage of their investment will come through more on the job creation side and some of the more, boost to consumption. So, so some of those themes may actually not be very different from what we've been seeing in the last couple of years.
I think in summary, it says don't bet against India in either case. So thank you so much, Neelkant, for a very insightful session. It was wonderful to know your perspective, and we thank you a lot for that. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. Good day.
Thanks, Neelkant.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rakesh and Akash, and special thanks to Mr. Mishra for the insights.